When people talk about increasing youth engagement in politics, they usually mean getting young people out to vote, maybe getting them to volunteer on a campaign. What they don't expect is a story such as this one. Sam Oosterhoff ran for and won a seat in 2016 at the age of 19, becoming the youngest MPP ever to sit in the Ontario legislature. He is the PC member for Niagara West Glanbrook, and he joins us now for more. Great to have you in that chair.
Good to be here.
Do you remember the moment when you got bit by the political bug?
Yeah, actually, I would say I did. It really pertained to religious freedom. The Loyola court decision, as you may have heard, Loyola was a private Catholic school in Quebec that was being told it had to teach from a religiously neutral perspective. Although it received no government subsidies, it was purely privately funded, and the government of Quebec at that time was telling them they had to teach from this perspective that contradicted their deeply held Catholic values. So they took it to the Supreme Court, and I remember observing that and reading about it and thinking, wow, I can't believe there's this much power in government that they're able to force this type of thing down people's throats.
How old were you at the time?
I was probably 14. Yeah.
14.
Yeah.
And it stuck with you?
It stuck with me. And then growing up with a big family and having lots of discussions around the dinner table, I remember a lot of heated discussions about George W. Bush and Jean Chrétien and whether or not they should go into Iraq. And I was only, I think, 6 or 7 at the time, but I remember those discussions being held with my older siblings. And
what was your position on that?
I didn't take a position. I was a Canadian. So
okay, good enough. When you were elected, I guess, were you a first-year poli-sci student at Brock?
Yes, that's correct.
You were at the time.
And economics, yeah. And
before you were elected, what was your plan in life before getting elected?
Yeah, so sort of an interesting story. I had worked for a year on Parliament Hill as a policy analyst and legislative assistant for a federal Conservative member of Parliament from the Calgary area. And before that, I was actually accepted into university for music performance. So that's sort of my first love is music. And
you're a singer.
I'm a singer, but I'm also a pianist. So okay. I did my grade 10 Royal Conservatory of Music, and that was something that I planned on going into, and also getting into law school eventually. That was sort of my road, and from there I was hoping to get involved, whether it was in constitutional law and some sort of civil liberties organization, or being able to make a difference that way.
Where did you get the notion that as a teenager you wanted to seek and win a party nomination and then become an MPP?
Yeah, so there was a couple of interesting situations that were at play in the riding that I decided to run in. Tim Hudak, I always had a lot of respect for, who was my MPP and someone who was also elected quite young. I believe he was 27 when he was elected, so a little older than I was, but also quite young. And he always said that age wasn't a barrier to making a difference in politics. And I had always heard from people who said that age wasn't a barrier, but I hadn't seen a lot of young people actually running for elected office themselves. And Father Sean O'Sullivan, who was the federal Conservative member. He's
20, I think.
He was 20, but he was also from my neck of the woods. So he was from Hamilton, Wentworth area, and I have a part of the Wentworth area in my riding. So half of his riding is half of my riding currently, and Reading in Both My Houses, which is a book that he wrote when he left because of leukemia. He left the House of Commons and joined the Catholic Church and became a priest there. And he spoke quite highly of what he was able to also accomplish at a young age. And I thought it was important that for young people to see their voice being represented at Queen's Park and in legislatures across the country. You hear a lot of disengagement from young people, but a lot of that has to do with the fact that I think we need to see more young people also being represented.
I have to assume, though, Sam, that along the way, numerous people came to you and said, Sam, you're 19. It's too early to be a politician. You got to go do something else first. What did you do when you heard those voices coming at you that way?
Well, I would actually say that there was less than I was expecting. Huh. I was expecting more ageism, for lack of a better phrase, than I actually encountered. A lot of people came forward and offered their advice. A lot of people offered their wisdom, and I always say that politics is a team sport. I'm not doing this on my own. This isn't just Sam Oosterhoff standing in the legislature and speaking from the wisdom of Sam Oosterhoff. This is about representing my constituents and listening to their priorities, their concerns, and their values. And that means surrounding myself with experienced people who have a wide variety of backgrounds and life experiences, and listening to good advice, and also working hard, because you have to work twice as hard as the next person when you're young and trying to make a go of it.
To be taken seriously, you
Absolutely.
mean. But when you are sitting in that legislature and you look around, and let's face it, I mean, pretty much everybody in there is either in their 40s, 50s, 60s. There's one guy in his 80s, as you know.
Two, actually. Two. Also Raymond Cho.
Oh, Raymond Cho, that's right, from Scarborough. He's also in his 80s. You know, as you look around and you see all that, well, I shouldn't assume. Let me ask the question. Do you look around and ever say to yourself, what the heck am I doing here?
I would say initially, the first couple months, finding the bathrooms type of situation, having those discussions, those introductory discussions, and getting caught up to speed on what was going on provincially. Federal politics is a very different ballgame from provincial politics. A couple of times it did cross my mind that, you know, I really needed to make sure I had good mentors that I was with, but I always believe very strongly in the power of democracy, and that means also listening to the voice of the people, and I've always done my best to consult heavily with my riding, and knowing that I had their backing on issues that I was speaking about, that knowing they supported me when I spoke about issues that I had roundtables on, whether it was the opioid crisis or palliative care. I knew these were things that it wasn't just me coming up with, it was really being able to be that conduit for the voice of constituents in my riding, and it gave me a lot of confidence. Who
were the guys who showed you the ropes?
Well, there was a couple of different ones. Vic Fidelli was very, very kind to me. Toby Barrett, who represents a similar type of riding in Haldimand, Norfolk. Also Jim Bradley. I've got to say, Jim is a wonderful, wonderful member of the legislature, and he actually came over to me my very first day in the legislature and said, I sat in the exact same chair that you did when I was first elected back in 1977. So having those sorts of discussions with different mentors in the legislature was a huge bonus.
Like Jim Bradley, aspire to be there 41 years from now?
Well, I mean, we have philosophical differences as it pertains to political orientation, but I would have to say I admire Jim. I don't know if I want to do it 40 years, quite frankly, but I think that he's accomplished a lot for the Niagara region, and I have a lot of respect for him. Let's
talk about, you know, Ipsos Reid, the polling organization, does some polling after elections, and they discovered that after the 2014 election, 34% of 18 to 24-year-olds showed up to vote. 34%, as compared to about 51% and change of voters overall. Why do you think there are so many people your age who are disengaged from provincial politics?
You know, I think a lot of it has to do with sort of this culture of low expectations that we've built surrounding our youth, and it's very unfortunate. I don't think it's only in politics, quite frankly. I think there's a lot of other areas. If you look back at the historical record and you look at the fact that we were sending 16 and 17-year-olds across to across to mainland Europe to fight the Nazis, and sending them to the east to die as well. Young people have had responsibility on their shoulders, and since the Second World War, it seems that we've sort of lost some of that type of engagement. And I think we've almost seen a type of tokenism creeping in, where people say, you know, we need to encourage the youth, we need to engage the youth. But when the youth actually come forward with ideas, when the youth actually come forward with issues that are important to them, it's often said, okay, well, we heard your recommendation, we're not going to do anything on it. And unfortunately, that's led to a type of disengagement among young people, where they feel that their voice isn't always being heard, and that's also unfortunately resulted in, I think, lower turnouts. But I think we're seeing that change.
Well, presumably you see something valuable in the experience of provincial politics that other people your age do not see. So what do you see that they don't?
Well, I think I see the potential to make a difference, and I see also the reality that it doesn't help any to sit there and complain about what's going on if you're not actually getting out and getting involved. And I've got to say, in the United States, seeing what's happening there with the American young people, and as it pertains to gun control, I think they're really taking that initiative, and I think that's also awakening a spark in the hearts of young people here north of the border, who are saying, you know, we can make a difference, we can make a change. I know in my own short career, I should say, I've already had the opportunity to run into a lot of young people on different campuses. I've visited most of the campuses across the province as the youth liaison for the PCs of all things, and young people that's changing. There seems to be a level of engagement now that, whether it's because of 15 years of Liberal government, they want to see change, they want to see what's going on.
We're going to keep things nonpartisan.
Yeah, nonpartisan, but I think we saw this in the 2015 election as well, right? We saw a lot of young people coming out and voting for Trudeau because they were sick of Harper.
Let me put this out here then. This is from Abacus Data, a question about whether we have a youth quake happening here in the country. 70% of Canadian adults say that young Canadians are not prepared to be community civic leaders. This means they think young people aren't prepared enough to vote, become active in their communities, or engage with political and community leaders. What do you think is contributing to adults feeling that way?
Well, there would be a number of factors, and I think to a certain extent young people have done it to themselves as well, where we've self-isolated ourselves from particular areas and said, well, that's for, I don't want to call it adults, but that's for older adults to get involved. We are not going to get involved in those areas. We're not going to get involved in the Rotary Club. We're not going to get involved in the Lions Club. And we're pushing off adulting until later and later ages. And I think that's having an unfortunate impact. But I think also there's other things. If you look at the age that people are getting married at, the age that people are getting their first mortgage at, that's rising. And because of that, older people are now looking at younger people and saying, you know, they're not taking on these responsibilities. The adolescent stage seems to last longer, and it becomes a vicious cycle where, because of the low expectations, young people don't want to rise to exceed those expectations, and because they don't exceed those expectations often enough, then older people may view them as never being able to exceed those expectations.
Here's from a profile written about you in Maclean's magazine, which I'm sure you saw somewhere along the way. Oosterhoff hasn't memorized his speech, so he must frequently glance at his script in his unwrinkled hands. His youthfulness comes out in other ways. His volunteers give out jujubes at the door, while family members tell stories of him shooting paintballs from a tree fort or assailing raccoons with BB guns. Says Aaron, he does a great job of representing Generation Screwed, which I gather is what they call folks your age. Do you, given your age, consider yourself kind of the representative at Queen's Park for young people?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say I'm probably more conservative than a lot of young people my age, but I think that I've really done my best to reach out to young people from all political stripes and hear what their concerns are and speak about those, whether in caucus or in the legislature. I think of last week, Arthur Potts had his bill on reducing the voting age to 16, and I spoke about that from our perspective as well.
Pro or con?
I was pro to go to committee. I can't commit to third reading. I think we need to see a lot more of the literature on that. I think there are obviously reasons that we don't allow young people to buy tobacco or to buy alcohol, and I think we have to look at as well at some of the cons, the pros and the cons. But I think it should definitely be studied.
I bet you were ready to vote at 16. I bet you were ready to vote at 16.
But I think that you can't
to cast an intelligent ballot.
Right, but I don't think you can look at the exception as well. You have to still look at public policy. Can't be made based on exceptions, right? Or anecdotes. We also have to look at the broader public policy impacts. But I would say that overall, I've done my best to reach out to people of all political stripes, young people, and say get involved. Particularly young women. I think we need to see more young women involved in politics and see that type of perspective being brought forward.
I wonder if you think, and I'm not trying to make trouble here, but you've been very open about talking about your Christian upbringing and homeschooling and so on, and do you think there's an adequate place in the public square nowadays for people of faith?
Great question. You know, this is something that I think is so important. I was actually talking to Jim about this yesterday. Jim Bradley, former Minister Malloy, who now works at the Center for Public Ethics, I believe it is. He actually was, I'm reading a book right now called Faith and Politics Matters. And it's written from the perspective of a variety of different people of faith. And I was involved with the Cardis Institute's Faith in Canada 150 last year, where I went to a weekend with faith leaders from all different backgrounds, 150 young people from Muslim, Sikh, Christian, Anglican, you name it, they were all there, Baha'i, and we had this very discussion. And at one point, one of the moderators asked all these young people, we were all under the age of 30, asked them if they felt there was adequate space to discuss faith in public life. And the response was overwhelmingly no, that they felt there wasn't enough space to discuss faith. And I think that what we've unfortunately done is created just a very sentence, sort of a caption for people of faith, and we sort of put them in this little box and assume that, oh, if you're from this background, then this is what you believe, and if you're from this background, this is what you believe. We haven't been able to allow people to sit down and talk about what that faith has an impact on their policy and beliefs. I'm
inferring here that you believe that because people like to label you a social conservative, they therefore think this is what you're about and nothing else. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it is fair to say. I think there's an unfortunate thing that happens where when people become labeled and they get put into these boxes, then it becomes very difficult for them to speak about other issues, and it becomes difficult for me, for example, when I speak about climate change and when I speak about some of these other issues that are so important to people my age as well. That's not really heard. It's just heard that we view you from this particular perspective, and we're only going to talk about this particular aspect. Okay. But I think there's other areas. I think of as a Christian, I'm called to love the most vulnerable in our society, right? And that also means reaching out to the poor, the sick, and the lonely, and,
sure, but
having that discussion.
I hear you, but I mean, your critics have pointed out the fact that you miss votes on bills that usually deal with gays or lesbians, and you know, restricting protesting your abortion clinics and all of that kind of thing. And you take a lot of heat for doing that. Do you think you will have more space to, and I think you took in particular heat with the previous leader, Patrick Brown, who saw his brand of progressive conservatism much differently than Doug Ford sees his brand, and perhaps your brand. Do you think you will take less heat under Doug Ford than you did in the past?
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I'm going to be listening to my constituents and talking about the issues that matter to my constituents, and I've always been very honest about being pro-life and believing in preborn human rights and fighting for those. But I'm going to listen to my constituents as well and see what they're talking about when it comes to also controversial issues. I think we need to make sure that there's consultation always being done, and I think we have to respect the true diversity of views around some of these issues of conscience as well. So I'm going to be doing my best to listen to my constituents, bringing their perspectives forward, and I'm sure voting accordingly.
I want to talk to you about the night of January 24th, which was a very heavy night in the history of the province and your party in particular. And you had a pretty significant role in all of what went down that night. Maclean's magazine leaked a transcript of a conference call that your PC caucus had the night they found out about Patrick Brown's alleged sexual misconduct. And then the leader insisted that he had support to continue, and you said to him, Patrick, this is hurting the party. Patrick, this is hurting the party. This is really hurting the party. And when Brown then suggested meeting later to make a decision about his future, you said to him, apparently, Patrick, you need to make this decision tonight, namely to step down. And I've always wanted to ask you, you know, as a 20-year-old, did you at any point appreciate that it might take quite a bit of cheek to tell the leader of your party, as a 20-year-old, I think you ought to resign and you ought to do it right now? What do you think?
Well, Steve, I think it was the right thing to do. And it doesn't matter whether it sounds like cheek. At the end of the day, the right thing to do is the right thing to do. And that means standing by your principles and saying what you believe in as well. And I believe that we couldn't go into an election having those types of allegations, very serious allegations hanging over the head of the leader of our party.
But you know what I'm saying here? It's one thing for the gray eminences of the party to come to Patrick and say, time's up. Is it another thing for a 20-year-old to make that insistence?
Well, I think also the people who voted for me, I always listen to my colleagues and peers, but I think the people who voted for me understood that when they sent me to Queen's Park, they wanted a fresh approach. They didn't want a member of the old boys club. They wanted someone who was going to speak his mind and be honest. And I did. And I intend to keep that. I think it's so important to be someone who is open, and that was something I felt very strongly about. And quite honestly, it didn't even cross my mind that it would be cheeky. It was the right thing to do. So I felt I had to go ahead and do that.
Okay. Let me, we've got a couple of minutes left. I want to tackle a couple of more things here. You know that the Liberals have come out, actually a couple of budgets ago, for so-called free tuition for post-secondary education for eligible households, lower-income households. The NDP has come out with its platform now, and there's a provision in there that for some debt forgiveness for those who are carrying significant debt for post-secondary. I think people are wanting to know what a Doug Ford-led PC party has in mind as it relates to policy for younger people. Can you help us out with that at all? Yeah, well, you know, I don't want to scoop ourselves.
I do want you to. You do want me to.
Well, I want you to scoop your leader.
I'm afraid I can't oblige, but I will say is that we're going to be rolling out more and more policy over the coming weeks, and it's going to be building on platforms. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of young people, whether or not they're in university or in college, I think of my peers, they want to be able to get ahead. They want to be able to graduate university and get a good job. They want to be able to afford life, and they want to be able to buy a house.
So will you have policy dealing with that?
We will have policy that will be working to make life more affordable for all Ontarians, and that obviously includes those who are just entering the workforce, those who are entering university, and we're going to be doing our best to make sure that young people as well can get ahead in the province of Ontario.
Okay. Sam, we've had a good long conversation here, quite wide-ranging, And you told us earlier that you are a piano player.
That's correct.
And sadly, we don't have a piano here for you to play.
Sorry to hear that.
But so am I. I'd like to hear you play. But you also told us you're a singer.
That's correct.
And your voice is here.
That's correct.
Do you sing on the hustings?
I do. Yeah.
Would you favor us with a few bars of what you might sing while you're out there going from house to house door knocking?
All right. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Glory, hallelujah.
Sam, you got an awesome voice.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
And we're grateful you could spare some time for us to come up to Yonge and Eglinton today and take our questions. That's Sam Oosterhoff, youngest MPP in Ontario history. He is the member for Niagara West Glanbrook. He'll be seeking re-election in the renamed Niagara West. Thanks, Sam.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.